biggest problem with anyone thinking that you can strike a deal with Moscow is what is the price you're going to pay?
The situation where we are in, things not only could go wrong, I think it will go wrong.
In our case, we have graduated to full authoritarianism.
A year ago, already there were reasons to suspend visa-free travel.
When we lose the visa-free, it's going to be double fault of the Georgian dream.
Now Russia is offering us like union state, we will get Abkhazia and Samachablo back, and it's worth it.
When you have a regime which calls them the global war party and the deep state and basically does not have a single friend in any of the governments, anywhere.
Hello and welcome to Talk Georgia, my English podcast covering Georgian and regional politics. Talk Georgia is brought to you by Droeba Media Group, a trusted source of high-quality media content, and GSAG, a think tank providing comprehensive political analysis of Georgia and wider Black Sea region, also academic and practical training for postgraduate students and mid-career professionals. To dive into the developments of Georgian and regional politics today, we are joined by Dr. Sergi Kapanadze, Professor of International Relations and European Integration at Ilia State University and Caucasus University. He is a senior researcher at Gnomon Wise Institute, founder and director of the board at Georgia's Reforms Association, GRAS as we call it in short. In the past, he was member of Georgian Parliament, Vice Speaker of the Georgian Parliament, Deputy Foreign Minister. If I'm not mistaken, when being Deputy Foreign Minister, he was Chief Negotiator at Geneva Talks, Head of Georgian Delegation. He holds PhD degree from Tbilisi State University in International Relations. Before that, he earned his Master's degree in International Relations and European Studies from Central European University. Dr. Kapanadze, welcome to the show. Please feel free to add anything I might have missed from this short introduction.
It was very general. I'm just going to add, I'm also the editor-in-chief of Geopolitics, the monthly foreign policy journal in Georgia, which is, I think, a valuable addition for those who are watching Georgia and reading about Georgia.
Indeed, I'm a regular reader of Geopolitics.
Thank you.
It is indeed a valuable edition of Georgian and regional politics assessment. And I'll start from the idea of assessment of the situation we are in Georgia right at the moment. What I'll do, I'll bring facts and I'll wait for your assessment, because the other day a very clever man told me that, guys, you are down with deadly disease, and unless you make correct diagnosis and then think about treatment, the time is against you. And I agree with him that it is very important to correctly assess the situation before looking for the treatment, because if it is wrong diagnosis, then the treatment wouldn't help. And in the best case scenario, it simply wouldn't do anything, but in the worst case scenario, it would do wrong. And in the situation where we are in, things not only could go wrong, I think it will go wrong. Again, let's face it, Georgia doesn't have legitimate government, neither internally nor externally recognized government. Georgia has one-party parliament, which I don't really remember since the Soviet times, to be honest. Georgia has political prisoners, I think up to 70 political prisoners, which is a higher number per capita than in Russia. People get fined 5,000 Georgian laris, which is an exorbitant fine for standing on Rustaveli Avenue or writing something on Facebook. One of the richest men in Georgia is in prison and gets beaten almost to death in his solitary confinement because Ivanishvili wants his bitcoins. Former Jara leader gets shot twice, or shots himself twice And before that, writes a letter, as Interior Ministry tells us, begging Ivanishvili and Kapanadze for mercy for his family. The list is very long. And these are the, symptoms of the disease this country has. And my question to you is that, what would be your diagnosis to Georgia as a state? What kind of state are we right at the moment? And at what stage of consolidating of dictatorship or authoritarianism we are in?
Right, so this is going to be a long discussion.
I will try not to stop you.
So look, I agree with the assessment that this is a very grave disease. But when you or a clever man, as you said, says it's a terminal disease, I'm going to argue there a bit, because a terminal for who? For the country of Georgia? I think, yeah, it's a grave disease. I don't think it's going to kill this country. I think this country is going to overcome this disease. If you take a historical sort of outlook, it's going to be overcome. We've had worse times by far, and I'm sure this is just sort of a temporary deterioration of health. Even though this is a gray one, I have to say that. The reason I say it's not terminal is that I don't believe that with this sort of dictatorship, full authoritarianism, complete suppression of the political freedoms, arrest of the opponents and all that, I don't think this government is going to carry on for long, taking into account the sort of new generation we have, or the generation of the resistant actors we have, whether these are the media or the civil society or the political opposition. So I don't think it's going to be long, even though simply because the enemy or sort of the proponent is very rich, very aggressive, holds all levers of power, it's not so easy to get rid of them. And also because it is supported by a mammoth like Russia. And so I think in this context, it is easy to assess that this is a terminal disease. I would say it's a grave disease, but it's not a hopeless situation at all.
Yeah.
Now, having said this, though, we should not underestimate the problems that we are facing. So, for instance, so what is the correct assessment? So I think all those people who are studying Georgia or looking at Georgia or involved in the Georgian politics from outside or inside, I think we all need to sort of understand that we are no longer in a transition period or in some sort of a hybrid authoritarianism. It's a full-fledged authoritarianism. We just need to call it what it is. Because one thing which is characteristic of hybrid is that it sort of has elections. And then in those elections, which are usually the mock elections, the government sort of carries on and secures the mandate. I think in our case, we have graduated to full authoritarianism because elections don't necessarily make sense any longer after the last year's election, after the sort of manipulation we saw. We have political prisoners, as you correctly said. We have a full frontal attack on the civil society, which has happened in such a short period of time. It has sort of deteriorated. It's such a short period of time that we haven't seen anywhere else. Neither in the hybrid authoritarian countries in Europe, like Serbia or Hungary, nor in Russia, where it has taken at least a decade to achieve the same status. So we have graduated there. We are already in full authoritarian system. Now, this means that the countries or the actors who are dealing with Georgia, as well as the local actors who are resisting this authoritarianism, they need to act as you act in a full authoritarian system, which means that in a normal democracy, you can have certain playbook. In a full authoritarian system, you need to change your playbook. You cannot win, you cannot defeat a dictator, you cannot defeat a full authoritarian, especially the one that has unlimited resources and has unlimited political power. You can't really do it with the normal means. So I think this needs to be understood by all the actors. Now, when I say about our friends, what I mean is that sometimes they sort of still give credit to this regime, saying that, maybe we're going to press and then expect that they're going to reverse some of the things they've done. No, they're not. Because in the full authoritarian system, you don't yield to external pressure. That's like a ABC of the authoritarianism. We do not. You yield only to a big pressure, and you yield only to the kind of pressure which changes your whether economic, political, or security calculations. And so when there is a calling from the ministers or from some politicians that, we expect the Georgian dream to reverse this, and that, they're not going to do it. Simply because that's how the authoritarian regimes are. They will have to reverse it if they are hit hard with the sanctions, with the conditionality, with the things that raise their political cost domestically. Same goes for the local actors. When the local actors say, and by the way, for the many years, even the local actors, they would say, we call on Georgian dream to do this and that. There's no point there. You have to compel the regime to act, to backtrack. And this compelling happens through not just the regular political instruments like writing a post on Facebook or I don't know, engaging with somebody in debate, especially since there are no debates, as you know, for quite a long time now. Therefore, all sort of actions which are actions in the street, which are the actions that raise the cost for the regime, which make the regime uncomfortable, including some unconventional ones. This is the way to deal with the authoritarian, full-fledged authoritarian regime.
Okay, now let's move a little bit further. For example, I think you mentioned sanctions from the West, and what we see now, yes, there are some sanctions from the United States, from the United Kingdom. European Union still not hesitating, but because the European Union system doesn't make it that easy to put on sanctions, targeted sanctions, or Ivanishvili and his cronies. But the easiest leverage that the European Union holds at the moment is to suspend the visa-free travel with Georgia. It's easier to make this decision because it doesn't really need unanimity. And we see, and we've got signals that this is going to happen, because a few days ago there was a letter coming to the Ivanishvili's regime stating that, well, the deadline, 31st of August, 8 recommendations that needs to be fulfilled. And if that doesn't happen, then European Union will proceed with the possible suspension of visa-free travel. Now, my question to you is this, that could you elaborate on the importance of visa-free travel for Georgians? Not necessarily only practical importance, which is obvious for everybody. I mean, almost 3 million people used this benefit. But the biggest, I would say, biggest benefit that Georgia has ever got from the European Union. But also the political importance. Okay, again, to me, it is that, okay, if the European Union closes the doors to you and closes the borders to you, it means that they no longer trust you. They no longer trust your government, and they no longer trust Georgia as a state. Because, again, opening the borders to Georgians was I think, clear signal that we trust you, and you are welcome. Also, physically, you are welcome to Europe. And now, if this gets closed, what would it mean politically? And when I said things could go, not only could go wrong, but will go wrong if the dynamic continues as it is going now, again, what's your view on the importance of visa-free, possible abolition of it, and what should be the reaction from Georgian society to that? Because, again, to me, it means that Ivanishvili is kind of sticking his hands into our pockets and trying to rob us from the biggest benefit that we've ever got. And the reaction we should have should be similar to when the robber is trying to rob you. So, I mean, if you open up your pockets and give it to the robber and say that, okay, here it is and take it, or you just resist and say that, well, we are going to protect what belongs to us.
All right, so I think we need to, first of all, analyze if we lose the visa-free, which, by the way, I think we will. I have to say it with sadness, but I think we will. I don't like it. I don't want it. I would personally do everything to prevent it from happening. But the way things are going, I think it's going to happen. I don't know when, but it's getting there. But I think we need to, first of all, realize and also try to explain to our compatriot here, why is that happening? So let's be clear on one thing. Had the EU had the opportunity to sanction the Georgian Dream leaders or those who are enabling the regime, either bilaterally or, more importantly, multilaterally within the EU format, I don't think they would have put removal of the visa-free on the agenda. So the removal of the visa-free, I think, is the corollary to the inability to sanction otherwise because there is no consensus because of Hungary. And maybe Slovakia, but I think Hungary is now the sort of the primary one who is blocking it. So, now what does this mean? This means that the Georgian Dream knows what they are screwing up. I mean, there is no doubt that since December until now, or even since before that, but particularly in the last 6 months or so, this kind of laws they passed, I think it is impossible that they don't know that these are laws that are completely contravening all the EU principles, all the obligations we have taken up under the association agreement, under the DCFTA, under the 9 conditionalities, which they, disregard. But in general, these are sort of the violations of the basic principles on which the EU rests, right? So, and I think it's very naive to say that they don't know that they would be punished, let's put it this way, from the European Union. For a simple reason, because Georgia, as the EU candidate state, which has the association agreement, which has the DCFTA, which has the visa-free, is the only country right now which has also the similar legislation, which has the political oppression of the type that we have, which has such a deterioration of the human rights. And it's impossible that they don't know that this is the case. Now, having said this, they also know that there is a way for them to get away without sanctions if they have some of their buddies block it in the EU. And so that's what's been happening. So a lot of things you remember, and our friends remember, that there has been the so-called options paper on the table last year, about July last year, about a year ago, which had a lot of things that could have happened, right? But none of them did. And the reason why they didn't happen is because there was always a veto that inhibited them moving forward. Now, in that situation, the EU has a dilemma, basically. The dilemma is, so what do? They just yield to the veto and let the country continue this downfall, or they use the only instrument they have, which does not require veto, which is the removal of the visa-free. Now, what this means is that when we lose the visa-free, it's going to be double fault of the Georgian Dream. Double because, first of all, because it is because of the laws that they've passed and the democratic practice they have introduced here and all the oppression, whatever, but also because then they have prevented other measures which the EU could have taken short of full visa liberalization removal. So it's a double fault. And I think this is very important to explain to our people, that it's not just what they do, it's also what they don't allow the Brussels to do through their bodies, why we're losing this. So that's one thing. Now, the other thing is that even with what I've just said, I think the EU still has other options before it resorts to the removal of the visa. So, for instance, not all EU member states have introduced bilateral sanctions, similar to the Balts, similar to the UK, similar to the Nordic states, some Eastern European states. So that is still in the arsenal. They still have this instrument, which they have not fully resorted to. Now, I understand in some cases it is archaic practice. They've never resorted to it. In some cases they have to, sometimes they don't even have the legal instruments that are dormant. They have to sort of revitalize them. But nonetheless, I think that's where the EU, these are the things that the EU could have done. So that's one. The second thing is that even as we speak this year, there is a discussion within Brussels between the Parliament and the Council, as well as the Commission, to reconsider the grounds on which the visa liberalization suspension can happen, including the suspension in a targeted way. And I think that is something that the Brussels can do. So I still believe that before they jump to the full removal of the visa-free, there's still instruments they can resort to, such as sanctioning, as I said, for instance, all the members of the Georgian Dream Parliament, who are, first of all, responsible for these laws, all the enablers of this regime, whether it's the economic or the media, etc., right? So I think this is still within the reach of the EU. They just need leadership. They just need more creative approaches. But having said this, once again, I think because the EU has not always been strategic, to say diplomatically, I think it will not happen soon, and therefore I think there might be a drive to jump to the thing which is easiest, which is not the suspension, but it's like, it's temporary suspension basically, because they just need the qualified majority for that. Now, the reason I say, and sorry to have gone about this long, the reason I say that the EU is not always strategic, for instance, the recent letter which you mentioned, I mean, I have to be very critical about it. I think the letter itself was, I don't even know how to assess it. I think it was a bureaucratic blunder. Not because I didn't expect the letter, because this letter is a logical continuation of the last year's December report on the status of the implementation of.
Absolutely.
And whatever is written in this letter, those 8 conditions or so, have been outlined in that report. The problem is that when you read this letter, it's as if EU is speaking from December of last year, as if nothing has happened since December of the last year. And because since December of the last year, the things which have happened completely outweigh the problems which are listed in that letter. So, for instance, the letter says, get rid of the so-called foreign agents law. Who cares about that law? They've passed the so-called FARA and the other legislation, so that law is irrelevant. The letter says, get rid of the law, the so-called law on the family values. Look, I also agree that that law is a very bad law. But since then, they've passed more than 20 laws which are in direct contravention of not just the visa liberalization obligations, but also the association obligations, and they're not even mentioned there. So any argument from any European bureaucrat that, look, we just follow up on the report, this is just irrelevant, because since then, things have changed. I mean, you cannot press in October 1939, Nazi Germany, on something on Anschluss, when they've just invaded Poland and started the Second World War. It's like the same sort of omission. So they've completely omitted what has happened in the last 6 months. And I think this is a strategic mistake, because when they ignore the major developments here, I'm talking about the EU bureaucracy, they also give the ammunition to this government to use their potent propaganda to counter it.
Yeah, which is basically flowing out from every media outlet they control.
Have just given them ammunition which they didn't have. Because now the Georgian team says, as we always said, EU is about imposing the gay marriage on us, because that's what they basically call for in the letter. Well, first of all, it's not true, but then they can refer to the particular paragraph where it is mentioned, right? And the EU is not mentioning anything which happens in the last 6 months. Now, I know they're going to mention this when the next report is out. It's just going to come 6 months from now. And this is a complete lack of strategic outlook, strategic thinking when it comes to Georgia. And this has been observed on a number of occasions. I'm just going to remind you, for instance, there were cases when the EU was saying that, they welcome the creation of the Anti-Corruption Bureau.
Yeah.
And we have always been telling them, but look, you have said you want it to be independent, non-politicized, accountable, and it is not.
But I think that came in this letter now.
It is, but it was still created, still a step forward. No, it's not a step forward. It's like, saying that, it's a famous saying that, is it a progress if a cannibal starts eating with a fork? No, it's not, because the essence of it is rotten, right? And I think the EU has made these mistakes over again and again, and I think they need to stop doing that. I'm too critical of the EU, but since we talked about this,
I agree with you.
A lot of actors have to take a fresh look at the strategies and the steps they've been taking.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and I say in that part also that you sometimes is shy of acting as a strategic union, or I think that EU needs to decide whether they are a geopolitical power or a trade bloc, or just a trade bloc, basically. And if they want to be a geopolitical power, and I think they are shaping themselves into a geopolitical power because of the geopolitical situation in the region, and I think that they need to realize that Georgia is also part of that. And the reason they want to be a geopolitical power, for example, the war that is going in Ukraine and Russia's imperial ambitions, that what is happening in Georgia is also part of that. And I mentioned a few times that what Russia is doing in Ukraine by the use of tanks and weapons and bombs, It is doing the same thing in Georgia by the use of Ivanishvili's regime. Again, if they are tough on Russia with the 18th round of sanctions, which is really, this package is really tough, I think they need to be on exactly the same way on Georgian de facto government. But I partially disagree with you about this visa suspension issue. I think that even if European Union is able to finally agree on targeted sanctions on Ivanishvili and some of the others, the reasons why visa suspension should come wouldn't disappear anywhere. And you said that, for example, these reasons that are outlined in the letter, they are not recent ones. They come from a year ago. The situation was the same. And a year ago, I think there were already reasons to suspend visa-free travel. And I think these reasons wouldn't disappear, even if the sanctions are there in place. So this is why I am saying that suspension of visa-free will be inevitable if the dynamic continues here.
Absolutely, it just depends when. So I agree with that. I mean, that's also what I said, meaning that had they been able to impose sanctions, they would not have an urge to remove the visa liberalization now. Because you know well that when decision is made about the suspension, temporary or whatever of the visa liberalization, it's not just the benchmark you're taking into account, but it's also the political situation, right? And so in a normal situation, if we had been violating all those things, I think we could have still got away, or at least postponed it in a long box. But now there's no stimulus for the EU to treat you politically, because politically Georgian has been completely ignoring them, attacking them, right? But if they had the chance to sanction at the EU level, I think they would not have rushed to this, which is not to say that they would have still requested accountability on the violation of those benchmarks. And once again, let's not forget, the things which happened since December of this year, of last year, they are just as in violation of the visa liberalization benchmarks.
Absolutely.
Just like those. Because, if the EU is referring to the so-called Russian law on foreign agents, they've passed the other laws on the same topic. Yeah. They've not just
even
passed,
tougher ones.
Even tougher ones, not just passed, they've actually made steps to concretely attack the NGOs, right? The first para of those 8 conditions is about the violation of the basic political freedoms, etc. I mean, look what happened in the last 6 months. You have 8 opposition leaders in jail. You have the civil society actors basically, in front of jail. And then you have a lot of activists who are being jailed. You have, just one thing to draw our listeners' attention to, we now have the fast tracking of the court cases of those people who have been arrested for the so-called forceful attempts in November, December last year, the protesters. And they've been fast-tracked to the point that their court cases are now held, are going to be 5 or 6 in August, which is an unheard of pace in the, not just anywhere, but in Georgia particularly, because here, as we know, the courts are sluggish. And it's clearly that they're doing this because they don't want the so-called 9-month period to expire, because then they have to release them. And so, this clearly demonstrates that there's a conspiracy. They want to make sure that these kids are kept in jail. And so these are the things which are also in direct violation of those obligations we have regarding visa liberalization. So I agree with you. It's going to be inevitable. It's just that it would not be coming in end of this August.
No.
Had they been able to impose the sanctions. And I think it's very important, because every month for the Georgian citizens, every 3 months, every 6 months is important. Because you asked me, which is why is it important for the Georgians, right? It is important not just economically, but also politically. But economically, I think it's obvious, because a lot of people take opportunity for these 3 months to earn extra money in the EU. A lot of people use this as an opportunity to, for instance, do some short studies or do the
medical treatment,
or even the business opportunity. So it's quite hard to measure it. We saw Mr. Kapanadze a few days ago saying that it does not bring any economic benefit. No, sure it does. It's just that it's not so easy to measure, because all those 3-month workers who go there and then they make money and send the money back. you see it in the remittances, but you can't really know what percentage of those remittances are from the longer stays and the ones. So that's one. And then obviously there is the issue of political importance, because of the EU, I think, has the visa-free and these sort of regimes with 60 plus countries, and not a single one of them is authoritarian, especially fully authoritarian.
In Europe, at least.
Yeah, so there might be the ones who have swings towards authoritarianism, but not like Georgia. And then the question is that when you are the member of the group of countries with the visa-free and this sort of relations with the EU, this obviously is viewed very positively by the investors, by the the economic actors. But when you are kicked out of that club, which we are not yet, but we're certainly on the way out, right? Then obviously it also affects the calculations of whether these are the IFIs, international financial institutions, or the foreign investors. Do you really want to go into the country which has just graduated from a hybrid regime to the full authoritarianism, has lost the EU benefits, is the major ally of Russia in the region from where Russia is retreating? I mean, would you really want to invest money, put your money here?
Yeah, absolutely. Very logical question, and it has very clear answer. I would say no. Yeah. Okay, let's move a little bit, not out of Georgia, but let's see. Okay, you mentioned that, well, we are living in a fully fledged authoritarianism or dictatorship already, and we need to call a spade a spade. And I agree with you, and some of those elements of freedom that we see, that is the remain of the past. It's not that it is being born now. No, it is, yes, I agree that it's the dictatorship. But dictatorships also are different in a way. And what my biggest fear is that the type of dictatorship that Ivanishvili has built, it's not just, it has not just internal implications or the implications for Georgian people in terms of benefits. It will have implications on Georgia's non-recognition policy of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, because I think that you know it better than me, and this non-recognition policy that was the cornerstone of our policy against the occupation was there, of course, chiefly because of our persistence, but because of our partners' support, wholehearted support. And if there is no similar support from the United States and the European Union and the democratic world, which Georgian Dream picked up fight against, I think that the longevity of this non-recognition policy would be under danger, under serious danger, if you ask me. So again, my question to you is that do you anticipate that if Ivanishvili basically manages to sustain power in a at least medium run, and again flirts with China, Iran, becomes chief ally with Russia, and isolates country from the West, would this mean that Russia will basically drag us into like a union state with herself, kind of promising that Abkhazia and South Ossetia would be part of this union state, and then Ivanishvili's regime would try to use as a pretext or propaganda to persuade some of the people that will be, I mean, worse off because of the dictatorship, and I don't think that there will be enough money to continue and carry on with the same level of, I would say, welfare. Which, I mean, Georgia is not a welfare state, it's a poor state, but it will be even poorer. And then what we will probably get is that, okay, now Russia is offering us like union state, we will get Abkhazia and Samachablo back, and it's worth it. Exactly the same way as they're playing with this idea of gay marriage and visa-free travel. They say that we will say no to visa-free travel, it will save us from gay marriage. So the same story would be probably there, saying that, you know, of course we say no to the democratic world, but we will have this opportunity to reunite the country by the help of Russia. So do you see this danger?
I do. I think, and actually thank you for that, because I think it's there's one thing that we miss in this society is looking not just one, but maybe 2 or 3 steps further and sort of digging deep into what could happen in different scenarios. So we actually have in the Geopolitics journal, we have we're gonna 2 articles in the last volume and the one coming now exactly about what you just said. And I think it's a very important thing. And let me just build on what you said and why I think this is a danger. So let's start with the sort of restoration of territorial integrity issue, right? So that issue has had different pillars. So all the governments said we want to restore territorial integrity, and the question was how. And all of them, even though many governments had different visions, they had different pillars, and in many cases they coincide with each other. So what were those pillars? So one of them was, as you correctly said, non-recognition. Now, what does non-recognition rely on? It's not just foreign support. It is important, but not the most important. The most important one is having a very solid international legal foundation for your claim. And I think that was, because at that time I was dealing with this issue at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I can tell you for sure, most of the countries we had outreach with, including the African, Sub-Saharan, Oceania, etc. countries, they first talked to us. If there were problems, then they spoke with our friends, right? And the major topic of discussion was who is right from the international legal perspective. And we were always on the right side. And the reason I say this is now a problem is that if you look at the work of the so-called commission, which is in the parliament,
commission,
that one is completely undermining our international legal stance.
Absolutely.
Because if the Georgian state says, current Georgian state, that it was a Georgian state in 2008 who started the war, because all this, excuse my French, bullshit, that this was the previous government and not the country, that doesn't matter. Because under international law, the one who governs takes the responsibility and the actions of that entity are attributable to the state. This is ABC of the Articles on State Responsibility. So if Georgia now says that it was Georgia's fault, what happened in 2008, consider all the international legal fundament to be undermined. And if that is undermined, there is not a single reason why some country in sub-Saharan Africa, which can get 50,000 loan from Moscow, or some country in Oceania is not going to recognize Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And let's not forget, the whole game of Russia when it came to these regions was to get the countries on board first in terms of numbers and then in terms of the quality. So they would get Nauru, Tuvalu, whatever, because just, and then they would say, okay, maybe now we can get to Fiji, or maybe now we can get to Peru, because if you have a Fiji and Peru, then it's easier then to increase the number. Absolutely. And if your international legal status is undermined, it's over. So that's one. The second one is, which you already said, the relations with the friends. We've had a number of cases when a call from the US Vice President or the US State Secretary or the European Commissioner or our friends in the high levels of the European politics, they would just pick up the phone, call the countries who were at the risk of recognition, and they would change their minds. And now, when you have a regime which calls them the global war party and the deep state, and basically does not have a single friend in any of the governments, anywhere. All the friends they have right now, especially like in the European Parliament or the political forces in the different countries, are the ones who are extremely ultra-right, extremely pro-Russian, against the European Union's global role or the America's global role. So they are the ones who are not going to help us with our non-recognition. No, these are the guys who are actually often used by Moscow to claim the recognition of Abkhazia, South and the regions like that. So we have lost a friend. So non-recognition is just going to basically disappear. And then there's an issue of engagement, because, in the last 20 years or so, there have been different attempts how to engage the population of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and it all came down to confidence building, different activities together, economic, etc. And that all comes down to money. And if you are dooming yourself for the non-development vector, where it's just going to be basically, only counting on the Russian, Chinese, or whatever money, if you're not going to have any development assistance because of the stupid laws you've passed, if you're not going to have the European Union's interest in this process, you don't have the engagement policy, just like that. And finally, what is the model how we want to view this conflict resolution? Because there are different models, right? The one is the use of force. And I don't think anybody wants the use of force, right? So let's just move that aside for a second. And then there are two other ways. The one way is some sort of a Cypriot model where you together with the European Union's magnetism and the attractiveness, whether it's economic, security, or whatever, sort of you juxtapose it with what Russia stands for. And the people on the ground say, you know what, okay, this is the better alternative. And Moscow, pressed by outside, has to deal with that. So that's, I think, the only viable option. Because the other option is striking a deal with Moscow. And I'm going to stay here for a second. And I think the biggest problem with anyone thinking that you can strike a deal with Moscow is what is the price you're going to pay? Because when we all say we want to see the territorial integrity restored, we never add this, but we always mean that we want to also maintain sovereignty. Because we don't want to, I don't want to restore territorial integrity at the expense of sovereignty. Let me be very clear about that. If Georgia becomes amalgamated into Russia as during the Soviet Union, at that time we had the restoration of territorial integrity. I'm against it. I'll be very, very frank. I'd rather have the current status quo than Georgia losing sovereignty. So the problem with that approach, which seems like Ivanishvili and the Georgian regime might be taking, that they're going to sort this out with Moscow. The problem with that is the price. And in the circumstances when it's completely non-transparent, what are these relations, what are they talking about, etc., in the circumstances when we know what Russia wants, we know what Russia is not going to do. They're not going to present us. They're not going to gift us our territorial integrity. They're going to ask for something in return. And that something in return is not going to be say no to the candidate status, because we've already said no to candidate status.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be say no to NATO, because we already said no to NATO. It's not going to be, use the abusive language towards Americans and Europeans, because they've already done that without having getting anything in return. So what it's going to be some sort of major loss of sovereignty, but it could be wrapped in a sweetener. Call it a union state or call it a whatever, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. But if the bottom line is that we're losing sovereignty, then it's just not worth it. And what I'm afraid is that with this trajectory that this government has taken, they've undermined the non-recognition, they've undermined the engagement, they've undermined the Europeanization potential of these regions and the magnetism of the European Union. They have put themselves in the shoes when they're only going to have a bad choice or a worse choice. And when it's bad or worse, it always becomes worse or worst. And in those choices, you can't really move forward. Because we've already been there. Let's not forget. In the 90s, we had a choice. Do we have a constant instability, or do we join the Commonwealth of Independent States? And that was linked to Abkhazia. Let's not forget that, right? And we chose, which was at that time maybe the better choice, joining the
relative stability.
Joining CIS, but then we got stuck with Russia for the next, and thanks God that it was reversed because of the Rose Revolution, etc. So when you put yourself in a no-choice situation, you have no choice. And that's exactly what this regime is doing.
Very interesting. But sadly, time is against us, so we have to bring it to a close. But let's look ahead. So what's the way out? 2 minutes, so I think 3 minutes, I don't know.
I think, as I said, in the long run, I don't think this is sustainable in this country. We've had the worst regimes that failed to sustain this. But I think what I want to happen, what I believe is going to happen is that this democratic resistance which is here, which is ratified in many things, starting from the academic, ending with people in the streets, etc. When this succeeds, I think we will have a chance to really fast track and to really sort of regain our rightful place in the region in terms of the importance, whether it's transit, geopolitical, etc., as well as in our strive at the forefront of the democratic nations, at the forefront of the democratization. And I believe that Georgia will be one of those countries who will be a successful case study of the integration into the European Union. And once again, without losing the sovereignty and without losing all these stupid things which are being discussed now by the Georgian dream, who in many cases have no idea what they're talking about. In other cases, they just do it for the propaganda purpose. And I think this is going to happen. The problem, and I'm going to stop here with the problem, because we are in a situation where we need to be, first and foremost, be speaking about the problem. The problem is that, as you said, it's time. And we are racing against the time. Because right now, the window of opportunity we have for that is maybe the next 4 or 5 years. And the later we start, the bigger is going to be the chance we're going to miss the window of opportunity. And I think that's the reason why I say that this is a grave situation, but I don't think it's hopeless. But if we miss this window of opportunity, still I don't think it's going to be hopeless in the long run, but we might be shut out for another, I don't want to say how long.
Yeah, I think same story. For example, if we had if we used the opportunity, for example, in 2004 when there was a big bang expansion of the European Union, then we would have been not better off, but safe and sound. Yeah. But we missed that, and now this is the similar opportunity. If we miss that, 20, 25, maybe longer, I don't know. And
for the history, it's not a big period of time. For myself, for you, for the sort of regular people, it is. I remember in 2003, I have just graduated from the Central European University. I was one of the first persons who started the European Union-related courses here, and it was my dream. And I was sure that we would come to the point when we would get the candidate status and start the accession negotiations. And it only happened 22 years since then, even though I was sure it would have happened 6, 7, 8, 10 years later. But it doesn't matter because we're still here. We lose another 20 years, it's still going to happen. It's just that people will have squandered time without using the opportunities and the benefits of the security, prosperity that the European Union offers.
Thank you, Dr. Kapanadze.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for watching us, listening to us. Please like us, subscribe us, and I'll see you next week.